part of the reason we like alcohol is that it rushes our brain with GABA. And so if 1 minute we were feeling wound up, tense, we have a couple drinks and suddenly we're relaxed, we're calm, we're confident. And if the story ended there, I would say alcohol is a great treatment for anxiety. But of course, our brain, our body sees all of that GABA. It furiously attempts to restore homeostasis. And in the case of alcohol, it does that by converting the GABA to a glutamate, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter. Inevitably, we wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning, racing thoughts, racing heart. We feel irritable, anxious. We don't get great sleep. And then that contributes to our anxiety alongside the fact that the glutamate itself contributes to our anxiety the next day.
Dr. Ellen Vora, welcome to the podcast.
Inka, thank you so much for having me.
Today's episode is very important. It's about anxiety. So I would like to cover what is anxiety, what are the symptoms, what are some of the reasons, and what are some of the cures for it. So tell me, what's your background and how did you end up treating anxiety with also holistic and natural tools?
Sure. My background, it really started in a very conventional way. I went through medical school and psychiatry residency, and like so many people that end up taking a sharp left turn and taking more of a holistic approach, I came by that honestly, which is that while I was in medical school, I was really unwell. And I had polycystic ovary syndrome and ocular migraines and IBS and acne, and I couldn't get a period and I couldn't poop to save my life, had autoimmune markers in my blood work, joint pains, so many issues going on. And I did what people do. And I went to see my primary care doctor and my gynecologist. And I didn't yet have the vocabulary to describe what didn't sit right with me about these encounters. I know now that in that functional medicine mindset that I have today, their suggestions were always symptom suppression rather than root cause resolution. So they would say, well, you seem stressed. Maybe we should just put you on Prozac, or let's just put you back on the pill because then you'll get your period again. And it left me feeling like there's got to be a better way. And that was happening in parallel with the fact that as I was being trained to masterfully medicate my patients, I also suspected maybe there was a way to help people thrive more effectively. And so these were happening in parallel. I was sort of disenchanted with my training, in crisis with my health, and through a very inefficient process of exploring how to support myself and my patients, all of this came together. I ended up going on and studying Chinese medicine, acupuncture, Ayurveda, nutrition, functional medicine, psychedelic medicine. And now all of that informs everything I do with my patients.
Wow, that's a very comprehensive background. I feel like you just described the story of my life in terms of your symptoms. And I think what many women go through, and why not many men as well, this kind of having a set of unspecific symptoms, not really knowing where they relate to, and then going to doctor and getting like a prescription for anxiety medicine or depression medicine, not really addressing the root causes. So I'm so happy that you are educating people about the root causes, which are so important to address. So in terms of anxiety, what is false anxiety and what's true anxiety?
Yeah, so this is the central thesis of my book, where I have realized that the way I was trained to think about anxiety and to classify it according to the DSM, or Diagnostic Statistical Manual, it's the Bible of mental health, that wasn't steering management in a meaningful way for me. And so what made more sense was to classify anxiety as 2 types. What I call false anxiety, which is avoidable anxiety. It's anxiety that's based in the physical body, and it occurs when something has tipped the physiology into a stress response, and then we subjectively experience that stress response as what we call anxiety. But it's actually occurring on the level of the physical body, and it's usually a result of some seemingly innocuous aspects of modern life. So it can be that we had a bad night of sleep, we had an extra coffee that day, we're hungover, our blood sugar's crashing. This can generate a stress response and we can feel anxious. And I think we would do well to address the false anxiety at the level of the body, and then we can eliminate a lot of unnecessary suffering. But then true anxiety, on the other hand, is purposeful anxiety. It's not something to pathologize. It's not what's wrong with us. It's actually what's right with us when we are able to viscerally connect to what's wrong in the world. And this can pertain to our personal lives, our communities, the world at large. But it's our inner compass nudging us, asking us to slow down and pay attention and usually acknowledge some truth that we've kind of known for a long time deep inside. It's often an inconvenient truth, and it has some call to action baked into it. And so true anxiety, it's not something that we get to decaf coffee our way out of. It's not something to suppress. It's really something to listen to and heed.
Would you say this includes things like, working on maybe some past trauma that is coming on the surface?
Yeah, thanks for bringing up trauma. So I think trauma is actually this unique case. I guess every system of nomenclature always has its breakdowns, and trauma, I think, is a unique, it sort of has elements of true and false anxiety in it, primarily true. But I think that in a sense, that the trueness of the way trauma contributes to our anxiety levels is that this is our story, this is our makeup, and it deserves to be listened to and honored. But I also really think that it creates a lot of suffering in the here and now that it's not exactly false, but it doesn't have to be happening. And I think what happens is that in the time in our life when we're experiencing the trauma, the limbic system, in an effort to protect us and help us survive, becomes tuned to a threatening world. And it says, like, I see threat everywhere. And it gets locked into that on position, almost like the foot is stuck on the gas pedal. And then if we're lucky enough to move into a different phase of life where we're safer, it's sometimes hard to let go of that hyperarousal state. And so with trauma, I think it's so important to use some kind of trauma-focused therapy like EMDR or somatic experiencing therapy or primal trust. There's so many different programs now, but something that can help reprogram the limbic system so that it can understand that was then, this is now, and we don't have to be so attuned to potential threat in the here and now.
Mm. Yeah, that's so true. Like this kind of body-mind work is possibly one of the best ways to get out of this locked-in state, right? Mm. So you mentioned several things here. You mentioned blood sugar. You mentioned like this kind of coffee. You mentioned trauma. So anxiety can be caused by many things. What are the most common root causes of anxiety? Something maybe that you come across in your work and also, through scientific studies.
Yeah. So, I mean, here this really calls upon the way I think we're ready for a departure from how we've been taught to think about mental health writ large, because we've all been indoctrinated with the monoamine hypothesis for depression, for anxiety. We've all been taught to think our mental health is the result of a genetic chemical imbalance, that basically if we're depressed or anxious, it's because we have low serotonin. And it forces us to think about our mental health as existing from the neck up, just contained to our skull. And not only is that myopic and not fully accurate, but it's our least hopeful narrative around mental health. And a more comprehensive and truer understanding of the evidence-based determinants of our mental health issues. That list includes how we're sleeping, whether or not we're in a state of inflammation, how nourished we are, whether or not we have micronutrient deficiencies, the functioning of our hormones, the health of our digestive tract, all the way to more psychospiritual dimensions of our well-being, like, are we held by community? Do we have a sense of meaning and purpose in our lives? Do we feel like we're being of service and making a meaningful contribution? So the way I think about the root causes of depression, anxiety, is that some of them are physical. They're states of physical imbalance, and some of them are psychospiritual. They speak to our fundamental human needs for things like community. And that's always where I do my investigative work. And so, common physical ones, certainly with anxiety, blood sugar is a really common one. And a lot of us are on a blood sugar roller coaster. At least here in the United States, our diet is just refined carbohydrates and coffee drinks that are secretly milkshakes and rosé all day. And people are on a blood sugar roller coaster. And when our blood sugar crashes, this induces a stress response in the body. And then that feels synonymous with anxiety. Caffeine sensitivity, the alcohol, and how that has an impact on our neurochemistry. These are some really common root causes. And I would say inflammation is also very common, as well as exogenous hormones, things like the birth control pill. So those are some that immediately come to mind, but there are many.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk more about the food and it links to anxiety and also the alcohol. But before that, I would like to know about the treatment of anxiety, and is treating anxiety broadly the same or different for different causes of anxiety?
Oh, completely different. It's a great
Mm.
question. Yeah, I mean, it really, to me, we're taught to think anxiety is this monolithic thing, that it's a diagnosis, it's an identity, and that the treatment is an antidepressant or a benzodiazepine, or maybe cognitive behavioral therapy. But to me, anxiety is not a diagnosis, it is a symptom. And it's the body communicating basically stress response, amygdala overactivation. And so then that doesn't tell me very much at all about what the cause is. It's just the way the body is manifesting. And so then the work begins in evaluating what are the physical states of imbalance for this person? What are the psychospiritual states of imbalance? And only once we identify those underlying states of imbalance, then we know the pathway to supporting them. So if one person is inflamed, we're going to heal the gut and get their vitamin D levels to a healthier place, maybe more sunshine, maybe more fermented foods, maybe less inflammatory foods. And that would be the strategy. Whereas another person will just stabilize their blood sugar. Somebody else, maybe we consider a different birth control method than the birth control pill. And somebody else, we might just prioritize early bedtime and better sleep. And another person, we might just focus on community. So it depends on what is the underlying root cause for a person. And often, as we are humans and we contain multitudes, it usually draws upon many of these. And so it's some combination of physical and psychospiritual root causes.
I think that's so important to realize and understand. And this comes across very well and in an understandable way in your book, The Anatomy of Anxiety. I love how you list all the potential reasons for anxiety and how to start tackling it. But I think, like many times when we talk about anxiety, let's say, then, the general advices might be, okay, this and this kind of diet. But if the anxiety is actually the lack of community, let's say COVID related anxiety is actually anxiety from isolation, and you start limiting your diet, you get even more anxious and you're still lacking that social connection, right?
You bring up such an important point, and it was really important to me to drive this home in my book, because for some people, I do think it behooves them to make big changes with their diet. Some people's anxiety is completely connected to their diet, lack of nourishment or too much inflammation. And yet for someone else where community is the single most important factor, making changes to the diet can be incredibly isolating, because then you're declining dinner party invitations. You're saying no to the birthday dinner of a friend out at a Mexican restaurant. You're obsessively meal prepping. You're fearing food. You're starting to feel like your body is fragile. And all of that can take you out of what little social connection you have available to you. And it can really be countertherapeutic in terms of stepping into a state of feeling well and whole. And so it's such a delicate balance to strike with food. We do sometimes need to change how we're feeding ourselves, but the framing is everything. And we need to do it from a place of radical self-love and with an attitude of, here's how I enjoy my food. Here's how I show myself love and care. Here's how I feel a sense of ease around these choices, not a sense of deprivation or self-negation or feeling fragile or fearing food. So that mindset is really essential.
Yeah, right. I just posted to Instagram a photo of telling a little bit about my experiences of reducing my food sensitivities from my diet. So I took the antigen test or the IgC test and find out my food sensitivities, reduce them from my diet, and told to my Instagram community that, hey, great results. My rash from my ear is gone and I feel better. And so many people actually responded to me that I would love to do this thing as well, but I'm afraid that I will have to give up even from more foods that I'm already restricting. And I realized that that can be a great source of anxiety as well, to like, yeah, going into the health, but with like too much health can actually cause other problems.
And just on that note, like navigating what foods to eliminate is very, it's an art form. And I think that if somebody doesn't do any upfront testing, empirically, just choosing based on what are common culprits for the population, it would make sense to experiment with eliminating things like gluten or dairy or the seed oils like canola oil. For some people with more autoimmune things going on, lectins in grains or nightshades like tomato, potato, peppers, eggplants, all of that is worth considering. But like anybody listening right now is like, oh God, I just heard you list everything delicious and wonderful in the world. And I think the trouble with when we're doing this empirically is that it can eliminate a lot. Sometimes doing a very dedicated month of eliminating and then systematically reintroducing foods counterintuitively can actually free you up to eat more foods, because then you can identify which things you don't need to eliminate. And because we're just sort of operating from here, the common culprits. But for one person, dairy really might not be important. And for another person, nightshades really might not matter at all. So sometimes it's helpful not only to rule in things that we should eliminate, but to rule out and to free us up to eat more things. And I do think always the goal is to have a relationship of ease with food. Not to mention the fact that if there's something called leaky gut, this can make us less tolerant of various foods that we're not necessarily inherently intolerant of. It's just that because they leak out of the GI tract and then provoke our immune system, we have a reaction to certain foods. But there, the ultimate problem is not that food, but the leaky gut. So sometimes eliminating irritating foods, healing the gut can free us up to then eat a wider range of foods down the road.
That's such an excellent point. What are some of the most, some other common foods that would be linked to anxiety or would potentially be causing anxiety?
Well, so that's where it's no fun to have this
Yeah.
conversation because it is everything that's good and wonderful in the culinary world. But added sugars, artificial sugars, refined carbohydrates, for some people, gluten, for some people, dairy, all of that is worth investigating. But I think in a way, we focus so much on what to avoid, and we don't give us enough bandwidth to what we should be adding in. And I think that's an equally important issue with anxiety is a lot of us are either overfed or just adequately fed, but we're still undernourished because the modern food landscape, it's difficult to check every box on the nutritional scavenger hunt. We need a lot of different nutrients for our body to function well, for our brain to function well, and therefore to have good mental health. And things like zinc, magnesium, folate, choline, bioavailable iron, like all of this gets really difficult to get enough of. And so rather than just focusing on what we eliminate, I also think it's essential to unlearn all of the miseducation around fat is bad, dietary cholesterol is bad, don't eat saturated fat, don't have red meat. Like I think there's considerations to all of these things. There's always nuance to it. But overall, we need to get back to nourishing ourselves, thinking about how our great, great, great grandmother would have wanted us to eat, and to think about what are the most nutrient dense foods. How do we eat a balance of different macronutrients? How do we eat a diversity of different colors of the rainbow? That's really where we start to check all the boxes and give our brain all the juicy nutrition it needs to function well.
I love that you raised that point. Yeah, definitely. I feel like in the health space, we are in some cases going to the direction where, the only thing that's regarded safe is water, and even that needs to be something deuterium depleted water or something like that. So it is a little bit difficult. What are the potentially good foods that you would definitely add to the diet if you would like to optimize your nervous system and avoid anxiety?
Yeah, I mean, it is a little different for all of us. And I think where you live and the season, this is a factor, but also our ancestry. And I think that if someone is descended from South Asia, they might do well with a different diet than somebody from Northern Europe or from Latin America. I think that there are ancestral factors that determine what our body really tolerates and does and thrives with. But I think on the whole, we want to eat a balance of different types of meat if somebody eats animal products, and that's its own discussion. But you want to eat a variety of different types of animals, but then different parts of the animal as well. In the West right now, we're very focused on muscle meat and we're very focused on lean protein. So everyone's just eating their skinless chicken breast and thinking that that checks the protein box. But we're missing out on the fact that bone marrow and ground beef and eating salmon with the skin on it and the chicken skin and eating lamb and different kinds of meats and different parts of the animal, oxtail stew, all of this gives us different nutrients that we need. And when it comes to our need for carbohydrate, that's its own big conversation. I think that women of reproductive age, for the most part, that's a category I treat a lot. And there's a lot of anxiety in women of reproductive age. I think for the most part, we need to be consuming carbohydrates, but how we get them is impactful. And to consume it from starchy tubers like sweet potatoes, squash, taro, yucca, and potatoes, I think that's usually the best tolerated way to get our carbohydrate rather than from refined, very processed carbohydrate sources. And then vegetables are an interesting conversation these days. There's kind of the carnivore movement that's saying don't eat so many vegetables. I think my jury's out. I think there's a lot of different ways to think about this, but processing seems to help us digest vegetables more easily. And so cooking, pureeing, chewing thoroughly, eating in a relaxed state of mind helps us not just struggle to digest all that insoluble fiber and then get bloated. And fruit, I think, is generally just a wonderful thing to consume, but you want to eat it alongside some kind of protein or fat so that it's not spiking blood sugar. And I think that things like bone broth, which have come back into favor, are really nourishing and helpful, and they're gut healing as well.
Do you think something like carnivore diet or ketogenic diet can be good for managing anxiety in some cases?
In some cases, yeah. I think the carnivore diet, like to me, the useful principles there are, for some people, I think there needs to be a therapeutic phase where you're resting the digestive tract. Because we've gotten a lot of information for decades now saying the best superfood you could possibly eat is kale. And while in a laboratory, kale has a lot of nutrition, it is a challenging thing to digest. And I think a lot of us have very irritated digestive tracts right now. Our digestion is compromised, we're inflamed, we have leaky gut. And so maybe just chomping on raw kale all day isn't actually the best way to support our anxiety. And so for them, I think like a little bit of more of an animal-based diet can be a way to soothe digestion and get more bioavailable nutrients into their bloodstream. But I don't think we necessarily want to avoid vegetables altogether. But I think some basis of a variety of different meats, fresh fruit, some people do well with raw dairy, things like honey. And I think that can be a really nice reset. The ketogenic diet, I think about as a therapeutic intervention. I think for men, postmenopausal women, I won't stand in the way of somebody trying a ketogenic diet. I think if I was working with a woman of reproductive age and she was struggling with epilepsy or bipolar disorder or a psychotic disorder, and she had the tools and the supports and the resources to do a ketogenic diet well, I would be in support of that. But so often, what's happening instead is women of reproductive age kind of dabbling in a ketogenic diet without the right support for it. And then I think it's actually not so beneficial and it can start to affect the menstrual cycle and it can actually contribute to anxiety then if it's not done properly.
Yeah, great point. Very good point. So we also need to consider our age and our hormones when we think about foods and anxiety. Many people self-medicate their anxiety and stress with alcohol. What's the role in alcohol in, our neurotransmitters, and how might alcohol affect our anxiety?
Yeah, I think that this is an underappreciated factor in anxiety. And it's understandable. A lot of people do self-medicate with alcohol for anxiety. And it makes a lot of sense. And there's a neurotransmitter called GABA that I think we're not yet talking enough about. Like we talk a lot.
I totally agree. Yeah, GABA is so important.
We talk about serotonin. We talk about dopamine. Where's the conversation about GABA? It's
Right.
like I consider it the endangered species of modern life. And it's our primary inhibitory neurotransmitter in our central nervous system. So it's really what helps us feel calm and okay. And isn't that what we all want so much these days, is that feeling? And part of the reason we like alcohol is that, much like the benzodiazepines, like Xanax, Klonopin, Ativan, it rushes our brain with GABA. And so if 1 minute we were feeling wound up, tense, socially anxious, we have a couple drinks and suddenly we're relaxed, we're calm, we're confident, we're chill. And if the story ended there, I would say alcohol is a great treatment for anxiety. But of course, our brain, our body is not so concerned with whether we feel calm or relaxed. It's always most concerned with our survival. And it sees all of that GABA and it worries that if a leopard were to come around the corner, we'd be too buzzed to care and we could potentially be in danger. So it furiously attempts to restore homeostasis. And in the case of alcohol, it does that by converting the GABA to a different neurotransmitter called glutamate, which is an excitatory neurotransmitter. And so then I think this accounts for why when we've had a few drinks at dinner, inevitably we wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and we have racing thoughts, racing heart, we feel irritable, anxious, and then we proceed to toss and turn for the remainder of the evening, and we don't get great sleep. And then that contributes to our anxiety, alongside the fact that the glutamate itself contributes to our anxiety the next day. Interestingly, with benzodiazepines, that class of medication that's sometimes used for panic attacks, anxiety, seizures, it's a different mechanism, but it also creates a lot more GABA in the synapses. But then the way the brain restores homeostasis after benzos is it actually pulls some of our GABA receptors. So it downregulates GABA receptor activity, which is an awful consequence, because then you basically, if you don't take the medication, you now have normal GABA levels in your brain. But it's almost as if the brain can't hear the GABA because it doesn't have the receptors to receive it on the other end of the synapse. And so that's why people find that these medications are so habit forming and you develop tolerance, and it can be so difficult to get off of them because then you just need to take the medication to feel normal, let alone good.
Right. So you can actually develop a tolerance for like anti-anxiety medicine as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it means that we're anxious, so we get into anti-anxiety meds, which as a consequence makes us more anxious when we stop them.
This is what makes me so mad. The minute I came across this research, this was like in my first year out of residency, I was irate because benzodiazepines, which in fairness are not approved for the long-term use of treating anxiety. They're approved for seizure disorders and for taking someone out of a seizure. And then they're used off-label for things like pulling somebody out of a panic attack. But at least in American healthcare, where a practitioner only has a couple minutes with a patient, and that patient is saying, I'm anxious, I can't sleep, this medication didn't help, we're writing a lot of prescriptions for benzos. And it makes that person very happy in the short term because they do work. They really do help. But what we set somebody up for is in the medium and the long term, we have actually exacerbated the original problem we were attempting to treat. And the first principle of medicine is first do no harm. And to me, that is the definition of doing harm. Somebody came to you for help with a problem, and in the long term, you made that problem worse.
That's crazy. And that's happening so much. I know so many people who actually have taken benzos for years.
Yeah, it's
And I've
really
heard,
hard.
yeah, and I've heard that, they say that, yeah, I would come out, but I just like get so anxious when I come out.
That's the thing. And that's why, so it's so difficult to get off of them. And you see this all the time. Like this was not someone who was like out there looking to do street drugs. This is someone going to their doctor and saying, I'm suffering with anxiety. Their doctor says, take this prescription. And then they're doing what their doctor told them to do. This is like a very law abiding citizen moment. And then they find themselves stuck on a drug for years that they can't get off of. And and it has big implications for their life. It also, and this is very doom and gloom, but it also increases the risk for dementia. It's really unfair, and that's why I feel like I'm a one woman army out here trying to spread awareness around the fact that we just need informed consent before someone takes that first pill. They need to understand the real efficacy, the real risk of tolerance, and how habit forming it is, and what it would be like to get off of it. People just deserve to know that up front. And then, of course, to be able to present people with alternatives, which is not to imply there's anything wrong with meds. There's a time and place for meds. I prescribe medication, but that we just always want to give people the full menu of options so that they can make an informed choice for themselves.
Right. That's so important. And I just love the fact that you're in the front line of advocating the holistical approach. How many people with psychiatric medicine you think could benefit from purely, natural approaches to anxiety?
You mean like where they wouldn't use medication, but they would be
Right.
able to? So that's a great question. It's a good question, and I don't know. I think that there's a couple ways I think about this. When it comes to depression and anxiety, my ideal would always be to catch somebody before they take medication, because I think it's easier to support somebody holistically before they start down the path of medication. Once they're on medication, then we're dealing with a new problem, which is their physiology upon withdrawing from the medication. Of course, you can just have it augment medication. So nobody needs to get off of a medication to use holistic supports. You can always do both, they can complement each other. But with bipolar, that's a special case where I've had a few patients over the years who have truly managed their bipolar disorder holistically. We've gotten them off of medication and they've thrived. It's a handful, but it requires a very motivated patient. And sometimes bipolar, by definition, it's such a rewarding state to be manic that it can be really hard to feel incentivized to kind of make life more stable. And so I find it sometimes hard to get buy-in from bipolar patients to really do the diet and lifestyle strategies that would help them stay off of meds. Psychotic disorders, I think that a ketogenic diet is an interesting thing to pursue. But overall, in my practice, I don't really treat them holistically. I'm always happy to offer supports. But I think about the window to sort of really treat a psychotic disorder holistically, it's usually in the past. It's usually that we would have needed to prevent the brain from getting this far out of balance a long time ago. So there, I think
Right.
medication is usually indicated. Not always, of course. Not all psychotic disorders are the same. And the work of Chris Palmer, who has a book called Brain Energy, is really compelling and interesting around using ketogenic diets to support psychosis.
Mm. Okay. So now many people are, having this subclinical anxiety. Um, this has been basically increasing, especially since COVID, but I think that it's just increasing, more and more. We have more world events, worse food available, and just like a lot more stress in this world. What, according to your experience, has been some of the most efficient ways to treat anxiety naturally?
Yeah. So I guess like if I like the way I present it in my book, where it's like, I don't get to know you, I don't get to know what your labs show or like where your imbalance is. If I just had to put it out there as like, here's where the highest yield interventions, I think if you can start anywhere, start with sleep. And sleep it's so interesting in that it's, it's, I think, our single most effective medication. And so many people are not getting adequate sleep. And it's actually quite fixable, but you have to think differently than our modern world. So right
Yeah, but
now,
what if you can't sleep because you have anxiety?
so right. So I love that question because we're all so concerned with thinking about how the anxiety impacts the sleep, which is true. Depression impacts sleep, true. Bipolar impacts sleep, all true. And conversely, sleep impacts our anxiety levels, our depression levels, our bipolar levels. And so basically, it's the easier entry point because it's like fix the anxiety with 7 years of psychotherapy or fix the sleep and then the anxiety is improved. And so I like to start with sleep. And it's very actionable because most of us are not struggling to sleep for some way that's fundamental and impossible to fix. Most of us are struggling to sleep for reasons related to our modern environment. The biggest factor by far and away is light, because our sleep is all programmed by our circadian rhythm, and our circadian rhythm is itself programmed by light. And so this was a foolproof system on the proverbial savannah of evolution, where we, by definition, got sunshine into our eyeballs first thing in the morning, and then the evening was, by definition, dark. And so that helped us really be in a healthy flow with cortisol during the day, melatonin at night, and then we didn't really have trouble sleeping. These days, we are indoors, we wear sunglasses, we wear blue blocking glasses, we might see light through a window or a car windshield, but not the real thing straight into our eyes. So we're not getting that programming first thing in the morning to feel awake. And that also ticks in the background to help us get tired at night. And then, of course, in the evening, we're surrounded by artificial light because we harnessed electricity and we invented the light bulb and the iPhone and Netflix. And so now we don't sleep anymore, but we can outsmart this. And basically, I encourage people to make sure they get some form of sunshine straight into the eye as early in the day as possible. It's not like you have to look at the sun. You just need to be outdoors without sunglasses or blue blocking glasses, not in a house, not in a car, and blink in the general area of the sun in that general direction. But then after sunset, to power down electronics, to dim the lights in your home, to maybe wear a pair of blue blocking glasses, something to prevent all that blue spectrum light from suppressing our melatonin. So that's the biggest change we can make to support better sleep. There's a lot of other things we can do. It's my favorite chapter in my book, but that's a good place to start.
Yeah, I love that you brought that out. I feel like, I've done podcasts on how to balance hormones, how to, improve metabolism, how to improve basically any aspect of health. And it's always this comes up. So that just goes to show how important the light optimization is for sure.
Yeah, and sleep is really everything. Light optimization is everything for sleep. And it's just interesting how, like, if you think about it from an evolutionary lens, it's very vulnerable, and it's in certain ways a bad idea to sleep because it's 8 hours of the night that we are vulnerable to our predators. We're not foraging for food. We're not mating. We're not doing anything productive. So, like, to me, deductive reasoning would say there's got to be something so critical happening during this that it was worth being that vulnerable.
And there is.
And there is. Now we know.
Yeah,
the lymphatic system, the hormonal rebalance. Our immune system does most of its work while we sleep. Our hormones rebalance. We address nascent cancers in the body while we sleep. All of this happens while we sleep. And so we reduce our risk for dementia, cardiovascular disease. We improve metabolism. We have better cognitive function. We're more patient and empathetic and less likely to die in a car accident. Everything improves when we sleep well. And of course, every mental health condition under the sun is improved by healthier sleep.
Right. Okay, question. So many people use sleep supplements, and you mentioned GABA and how GABA is important to basically relaxation. GABA is also very important for sleep. What do you think about supplementing with GABA?
I generally don't recommend it. I really think that, I'm so old fashioned in this way, but I think it's hard to effectively play God in the body. And I think that the best thing we can do.
That's very well said.
It's like we have to set our body up to manufacture GABA endogenously. Similarly with melatonin, we need to set our body up to endogenously manufacture melatonin. In the case of melatonin, we need darkness at night. That's pretty much what we need. And in the case of GABA, we need beneficial bacteria in our digestive tract because there are certain Bacteroides species that help us manufacture GABA. And then we need good nutrition, and we also need rest. And I think that we really deplete ourselves of our GABA when we're chronically running on empty and just running on fumes in our lives. And so nutrition, rest, and eating fermented foods is a great way to encourage the body to make its own GABA. The one sleep supplement I do generally recommend is magnesium glycinate. That's the one that's just hard.
Oh, I love that one.
Yeah, it's so good. It's safe, it's effective, it's helpful. And to me, it just, the way I justify supplementing with it is that it's just too hard to get it from our food because our food is deficient, because our soil is deficient. So if we keep waiting for our food to give us adequate magnesium levels by eating pumpkin seeds and avocado and leafy greens, we're just never going to get there. And so I like supplementing with it.
Do you have any other supplements that you think would be generally a good idea to consider if you have anxiety?
Maybe the only other things that I would point to, I think minerals is generally a good thing to supplement with. I like one called Quinton. It's these little glass vials of seawater. But there's a lot of good ones. Some people do sea moss. Some people just take like a concentrate and add it to water. But I think supplementing with minerals is generally helpful because of our monocrop farming and the fact that our soil is so depleted of minerals. We're just not getting it from our food. And I think if you do eat animal products, it's not really a supplement, but I think a spoonful of something like chicken liver pate a couple times a week goes a long way. That's like Mother Nature's multivitamin.
That's well said, and that's a very good tip. What are some effective body-mind work for anxiety?
Yeah, so it's all so good. So it's really just whatever you feel drawn to and have access to. I mean, I came of age doing yoga, and that was so powerful for me. And I feel like there's a lot of key learnings that I got from that, but most of all was how to maintain equanimity in the face of challenge, which I think has really helped me be resilient in ongoing stressors. And it taught me a lot about mindfulness and how to add a little bit of space in between stimulus and response. And so I think yoga is powerful, breath work of all kinds, meditation, craniosacral work, Reiki, acupuncture. I think all of these things are incredible. And they have commonalities and they have differences. But I think for the most part, we are just not inclined to rest and recover in modern life. I remember one time early in my yoga journey, I did a class with somebody where they had us do a yoga pose. And after every single pose, we took Shavasana, the final rest pose. It would be a pose and then Shavasana. And at the time, I was so annoyed. And
I thought that sounds so annoying.
I was, at the time, and I'll admit it, I was like, come on, like, I want to be skinny. Like, I want to, I want a good workout.
I want to sweat.
Yeah.
I want my endorphins.
And man, like the tired 40-something mom I am now, I just want to go back to that yoga class. But I think that it was so much wisdom in that, which is that we just don't integrate. And we're out of balance in the sense of the yin yang, that ancient Taoist symbol, which appreciates that there's a dynamic equilibrium between yang, that sun, masculine, active, doing energy, and yin, that moon, feminine, receptive, non-doing energy. And we all exist in such a state of yang imbalance where that's what we value and that's what we give all of our oxygen to, but we don't value yin or rest. And so I think we just need to inherently value leisure and protect it fiercely and unapologetically. So all of these different mind-body practices, part of what they do is in the doing of them, we actually have carved out rest for our bodies. And it's another endangered species of modern life.
Wow. Thank you. So support GABA, support rest, support sleep, start with those and work on the root causes.
Yeah.
So I really love your book. It goes, it just covers so much: body, mind work, nutrition, gut, GABA, everything that we have talked about and so much more. Where can people find your book?
Yeah, so it's called The Anatomy of Anxiety, and it's basically at this point sold wherever books are sold. And I have to count now, but it's available in a lot of different languages at this point, which is so exciting and such an honor. And then if somebody wants to follow along as I continue to explore new ideas, I'm pretty active on Instagram. I'm at Vora, MD.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and this interview has been so insightful and inspiring for me.
Inka, I appreciate you and how you bring such an intelligent insight to this work. And yeah, thank you for having me on.
Hi, I hope you liked this video. If you like the topics of science-based self-care, health, well-being, brain health, and longevity, subscribe to the channel and check out my other videos as well. I'm also active in Instagram and the links below. So see you there.